Thank you. Let me turn on my slides here. There we go. Thanks very much for the introduction. I do feel like I'm really part of your team, so appreciate that. One of the things that I really want to say, first of all, is that I so appreciate the openness of all of the 27 teams in sharing what was going on throughout this entire process, especially when you were transitioning to distance learning and were running into all sorts of issues, and yet had a lot of successes as well. So thank you very much. I also want to say that, let me see if I can move my slides forward, that that you thought you said goodbye to 2020. Well, I'm here to tell you that we're going back and looking at 2019 and 2020 just for a few minutes. So I apologize ahead of time. But I do want to say that that we heard, as the evaluator, we heard all 27 of our partner schools talking about the value of school to home. There's a quote up from University Heights, but we heard this from almost every school, actually every school working with school to home. And it's almost as though school to home knew something was coming. And they've been preparing it for us for this for how many years now? So we really, a lot of you said, gee, it's so great that I had this school to home to fall back on, the framework, the foundation. I knew who to call and ask questions, the professional development, et cetera. So I just want to say up front that you guys have been doing such a phenomenal job, and you really have kind of taken school to home to that next level, given the fact that you had to go 100% distance learning. So I want to just give you a really quick sense of how the evaluation goes, and the framework that we use. And I think it's really important given what we've heard today about the implementation. We have 5 research questions, and I've just put up titles up on the screen. The first one is really about implementation fidelity. And we heard a lot about that today. It's about those 10 core components. And the theory of action is that if you indeed get this right, that will lead to a beautiful, effective integration into schools and into classrooms. And it will have an effect on the learning that's going on at home and the closing of that digital divide. And if this is actually successful, then that leads to impact on student outcomes and the influence on kind of the changes in policy and practice that School to Home hopes is going to be happening, because to institutionalize and sustain some of the things, we do need that policy in place, and also to expand School to Home into other schools in your districts, and also beyond. We really need that to happen. So I hope you kind of get a sense of what we're trying to do here. And it's the reason that we look at a lot of different data as we go through. Now, you're aware that there are 10 core components. One of the things that Sunny and Augustine and Elaine and others did is they actually looked at those and said, which ones are foundational? You know, which ones do we really have to have, and then the others kind of play off of that. And they came up with these 5. So what I'd like you to do is to take a look at those 5 and go into a Mentimeter, which is one of the survey systems that I use. And I want you to enter that code once you get to mentimeter.com. And what you'll see then is are the 5 foundational core components. Oh, I have I fixed that spelling error in the Mentimeter. But anyhow, you'll have 5 slider bars, and I'd like you to, on a scale of 1 to 30, there's a reason for that, kind of put yourself on the scale of low implementation to perfect high implementation on all 5 of those. And then we'll kind of take a look at it and see. After all the work that you've been doing with the implementation and the panels, it's really a nice time to go back and do that reflection. So go ahead and go to menti.com, enter that code. All 5 will pop up at the same time, and we'll take a look at the slider bars. And I'm going to jump over there and see if any of you are there yet. Moment. You get the bars out of the way so I can do this. And present. It's kind of fun to watch because as people come in and actually score these, the bars change. So you can see those little movements and see where they're going. And the actual charts behind actually show you where people are scoring at. Very interesting. And it's interesting that there's some leading indicators and there are a few lagging indicators. I'm gonna let it go for just a second more as more of you come in and score it. And then we'll come back to what our analysis was. I'd like to kind of do those side by side and kind of show you where that's at. So I'm gonna actually take a picture of this. And it'll continue, so kind of continue your scoring. And then I'm going to go back to my slides. And what I'll do is I have the graph up. This is what you said. And here's what our analysis is. So it's a little bit different, but not a whole lot. Whoops, let me see if I can get that over here. Notice that I don't really want to look at the numbers. I just want to look at what's leading and what's lagging. And one of the things I think that you've done is you've actually been pretty much right on with the leadership curriculum and assessment. The technology bundles, you've kind of underrated yourself. We actually felt like you really scored it out of the park this year in terms of getting those devices in and handing those out, all the protocols that you used, all the technical assistance you set up, et cetera. The teacher professional development is about right on. The coaching and mentoring is about right on. And we actually felt like the scoring for parent engagement and education would be a little bit higher than what that is. So thank you very much. I'd like you to think about where you scored it and perhaps make taken the opportunity to think about what you'd like to be able to score it next year once you've had another year under your belt. So let's talk about this. Well, one of the things that people do ask us is, where do you get your data? And I just wanted to give you a sense of where we're going with that. We have 6 site visits. We were supposed to have 27, and most of those were scheduled, but of course the pandemic hit. So we did do 6 of them. And so we've got some data there. That's pre-pandemic. Then we did surveys, which are post-pandemic, 3,000 kids, about 2,000 parents, and about 600 teachers. We did 27 interviews, and thank you again. I know how stressed you were during that springtime, and you were so gracious to allow us to interview for you. We also decided that, and actually this is School2Home, and Elaine actually, and Augustine and Sunny said, well, if we're not going to do site visits, perhaps we could pull in some of the extant reports and the data that are there and compile it for people. And so we looked at these reports, the climate report, the California dashboard, the single plans, and then of course down here we looked at the LCAPs. And I think most of you are aware that your school districts were required to actually do a COVID-19 written report to the community about what they were doing with that. And then what we did with that data, with some of the data, is we actually created a partner report for you. Notice that there's a bit.ly here. And I just want to, again, jump over to that and show you kind of what that looks like. We created, let me go to the top here. I've got it highlighted a little bit. We actually created a menu that has hot links to each one of the reports. And then if you click on those, you can get into one. I've got one opened up already. I just want to show you what's there. Our purpose was twofold. One was to give you a sense of where your school stacked up in terms of our assessment, and to actually share out some data from the assessment that's specific to your school. And then the other one was to compile a number of reports about your school in one place so it was easy to find. And by doing that, you have a great foundation for launching the planning for next year. So notice there's demographics here. There's how did you score on the 10 core components. There's information about distance learning challenges that your school leadership team talked about, and they're different depending upon, of course, the school. We did pull in some survey data. We thought you might be interested in what teachers were saying about challenges. This one is kind of an interesting one to me. The teachers were actually weighing in and saying, well, what are the top digital skills that our kids need if they're going to be in distance learning? And notice the top one for this particular school, which is the John Muir Middle School, is time management. They really felt like that was something that the kids were missing, and so on. And there's parent perspectives here. There's climate surveys. And so we took the climate survey, some of the climate survey data, and exported it, and then compared it and contrasted it to a school that was a match in district match school. And I won't go any further, but there's lots of data here that we're hoping that will serve as a foundation for you. And one of the things that School2Home has really done a great job of is actually thinking about this program and saying, all of our schools that are at different places. And we ask, the schools are always being asked to personalize, to individualize. So why shouldn't we as School2Home do that as well and understand that this is a different journey for each one of the schools? And that's why the partner report is actually there. So let me go back to my slides here. So that's the partners. Now let's go on to the report that we are doing that is actually program wide. Again, I really think that these research questions are really important, and we're going to kind of dive into the first one, the implementation fidelity. 10 core components, and it really says, how are you doing in terms of fidelity of implementation? And how did this implementation help your school shift to distance learning? And so I'd just like to give you a sense of what the scores were program wide. It's just a 3-point scale that we used. And one of the things that we then picked up from Augustine and his team was what made a difference. Why, they made lots of notes about why a school would score at a 3 versus a 2 versus a 1. And so we just tried to compile those. And Elaine actually did a great job on this. Dedicated and energetic school leadership teams was number 1, that there were regular meetings that people met and talked about how they were doing and reflected on their work. Some of the schools were challenged by staff turnovers, high levels of implementation. And finally, there was a note that this is a leading indicator for the other components. No surprise there. The second one was technology bundles. And like I said, you guys really knocked it out of the park. Because of COVID, you really needed to get those devices into the hands of kids and get the broadband out there. And so one of the things we saw was that all 27 schools are at 1-to-1 or are close to that, that there's established practices and protocols. And this one, for a lot of schools, a lot of leadership teams, I think it was 14 or 15 leadership teams said, this really made a difference, that I had even if I wasn't school-wide, I had the practice and the protocol that I could just scale up quickly. So check-in processes, multiple drop-offs, technical support, et cetera. And we actually asked students a bit about their experience. And you can see here that 95% said they had a device at home, and you can see which ones. 70, and this was really impressive to us. 75% said they've been using that device all year long. And then 18% were assigned right before the pandemic, and 7% said they still didn't have one. So next one is teacher professional development, a 2.3. And again, these are characteristics of those schools that actually did really well on this, that there's a passionate administrator and they are supporting the teacher's professional growth. That this one is also extremely important, that there's alignment with other initiatives, that you're not just doing this technology thing to do it, but you know that it's integrated into everything that you're trying to do as a teacher. Some of the challenges were time constraints and shifting priorities in schools. And then these were the topics that, that teachers really felt were the top modules in the teacher training. Next one, coaching and mentoring. That number is down a little bit. A lot of schools have said that they just don't have the resources to have a full-time or even in some cases part-time instructional technology coach. There were some models that really popped up. One was an instructional technology coach that sometimes was at the district level and would come to the school, sometimes was actually full-time at the school. They also used another model with the release time for current teachers, and we just noted, this is really not any data we collected except to note that there's a recent research study that says that online coaching is just as effective as having a coach on site. That's huge. And so that's something that School2Home is going to be looking at as they develop some new materials for you next year. There was also a recognition by the team that it is important, but the resources are limited. And the other thing that we noticed is that 12 out of the 27 school leadership teams said this transition to distance learning increased the co-teaching and the collaboration among teachers. So there's already some of that mentoring going on because of the situation with distance learning. And in fact, some teachers were saying, we don't want to overwhelm kids. We're going to co-teach with multiple curricular areas. So there was some of that as well. So that co-teaching is actually a part of that mentoring piece that I think we should take a look at next year. Parent engagement and education, 2.1. The successes, where the schools that were very successful talked about the committed and dedicated parent lead, they're just on it every day. There's a supportive administrator, and that there's multiple ways to recruit parents. Some of the challenges were staff turnover, low registration, and low attendance. Sometimes there would be parents registered, but then parents wouldn't show up. So then they started calling before, you know the drill. And the disruption of the pandemic on families really took its toll in terms of parent engagement as well. And then more positively, we heard from the school leadership teams that the established parent engagement and education enabled their schools to scale up fast, that they already had the connections with the parents and could reach out to them and talk to them about what was going on with distance learning. And one of the things that we did is we actually did an analysis of parent engagement and then disaggregated by whether or not parents were in trainings or were not in trainings. And what we found is it mattered most for this one, that parents who participated in the trainings were more likely than parents who were not to communicate with their child's teacher at least every 2 weeks. And you can see the differences. There's less difference here, but they're still significant, that they go online more to check for posted assignments, and they feel more confident in terms of conducting internet research. So just kind of to sum that up, we would like to actually have those numbers higher next year. And I know you guys are gonna all work on this throughout this next year. The second one we want to talk about is integration into classroom and school culture. You can see the question here about has it been implemented in the classrooms? We know you do a lot of teacher training about SAMR and TPAC, et cetera, and the Triple E, but is it showing up in classrooms? And that's really what we're looking for, because now we want to know, what are the outcomes? What's the result? We do know, by the way, that it's correlational, and that there are a lot of other things going on in your school besides School2Home. So we recognize that, and we do put those limitations in. So one of the things I'd like to do real quickly is to get you again back into Mentimeter. So menti.com, and enter that number. This time, what I'd like you to do is share one opportunity that this disruption to your lives opened up for you, your students, and your school. We asked that question of a number of teachers, and it was amazing how people would say, yeah, it's been a disruption, but boy, it's also given me license to do this or that or the other thing. So I'd like you to just go to Mentimeter and just a sentence or two about things that it actually allowed you to do that you're really happy about. Or maybe you reflect a thing that you're reflecting on. Or something else. But what is it that there's a window of opportunity that opens up when something disrupts a system, and that's really the question that we're asking. So let me jump over there real briefly and look at that one. Okay. And we'll just take a look at a couple of things that are coming in. The opportunities, it taught us alternative ways to engage, and I'm assuming meet the needs of kids. 100% of kids have Wi-Fi's, which is new, right? Teachers are trying out new tech skills. We found that that the data show that everybody learned, even those people who would consider themselves to be experts in technology said, whoa, 100% is very different from just using it in my classroom. I'm learning day and night. So there was a lot of that. Help bridge the digital divide, the opportunity to grow my knowledge base, more teachers using technology, having the recorded sessions, really engaged, and the mindset change is happening fast. You can come back and read these. I'm impressed. Free licenses, that was a really good one, wasn't it? You could try all sorts of things out in the spring and summer. New ways. And a lot of teachers were telling us through the surveys that the things that they were trying out, they might not have tried out before, but they're going to take them back when you get into in-person learning. So thank you very much for the sharing. And we'll come back and I'll post all of these in this PowerPoint slide so that you can, in this Google slide, so that you can look at it if you so choose in the future. So let me go back to my slides here. Moment. Oops. Okay, so let me view. So now we're on to RQ2, which is is it happening in the classroom, and is it changing the school culture? And we have a couple of findings from the pre-pandemic site visits. We found that the technology integration was pretty consistent. What we did is we took the 6 schools that we observed, and we compared it to what they were doing the prior year, and found it was pretty consistent with some slight increases. We found that the student engagement was mid to high levels. Congratulations on that. And we found moderate use of learning strategies consistent with learning strategies known to increase cognitive engagement. We always look for, is there a depth of knowledge and critical thinking going on? Is there real world application? And is there a range of technology use? Because we know that actually can do some increasing and ratchet people up into higher student performances. We also looked at the transition to distance learning. There was a substantial increase in access. Everybody knows that, but it's interesting to kind of dig into the numbers. 94% of the students said they had internet access at home. That was a little bit different than what parents said, but not much. And they said, it was interesting because they said most of them, 3/4 said that this enabled them to participate in synchronous and asynchronous learning. And then you get into the numbers that said, didn't work very well for me. And we all talked about that earlier today. You talked about the opportunities in the Padlet, so I won't go into that. And the 3 major challenges that were identified by school leadership teams were maintaining the enrollment levels. And in the breakout that I had, people really talked about that. The facilitating the low cost and the engagement of kids. In addition, the school leadership teams reflected on what was it that School2Home was helping them with that really made a difference. And what they found was teachers were already using blended learning. 25 out of 27 said that. Communications with parents had already begun, and many had acquired the home internet access. It was actually to 84% last year. So you guys were already doing pretty well, and that students were already familiar with these tools. I'm not going to go into that a whole lot, but I did want to just talk to you about the fact that that teachers were actually thinking about the solutions that worked. And I'm not going to go into these now. A lot of special digital apps. This one was interesting to me. Some of the students exhibited a lot of responsibility and focus, et cetera, et cetera. And then one last thing I'd like to do, we're not going to stay in the rooms long, but I would like you to get you into a room to talk about this question. We had over 1,300 students respond to an open-ended question that said, what would make learning better for you? And this is a Padlet that I opened up that put kind of the 5 top things that they said. And notice there's a plus sign underneath each one of them. What I'd like you to do is to get into your room. We're not going to do any reporting out, but get into your room, and your group should choose one of those. Click on the plus sign and just talk about how you're addressing this issue that these students brought up about too much homework. They need more interesting, engaging, online instruction, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just going to take, Rosa, would you put people into rooms? We're just going to be there for why don't we just do maybe 4 minutes, Rosa, if that's okay with you?
I just opened it for 7, like the original plan. I'm sorry, but I'll call them back in 4 minutes, Cheryl.
Okay. Sounds good. So we're going to go back into our rooms, get into the Padlet, and your group is going to choose one of those and react to it. Enjoy.
Please view the breakout rooms at the bottom to find your breakout room. They are just random breakout rooms.
Hi, Rosa.
Hello.
Great. Once everybody is back, I'll share my screen again.
Everyone is back. All the rooms are closed.
Great. Good. Thank you. I'm kind of over time. I'm moving into the time when we're supposed to be having a bit of a drink. So those adult beverages are very important. So I'm going to just real quickly look at Thank you for one last thing is, thank you for actually being so thoughtful about the way that you responded to this. The students were actually they were not complaining. They were actually saying, if only you did this, I would learn more, or I can't do this amount of time, homework, because you're not there to explain it to me. So it takes me a lot more time to actually do the work. So they were really thoughtful about their comments and very self-reflective. So the RQ3 is about the effect in homes. And we did, I'm not going to do a lot of these, but there's a lot more home access. Parents were actually feeling pretty good about talking with their students about digital citizenship and online safety. And parents were really interested in getting more web resources. And the effect on this was actually really interesting. Elaine particularly thought you might be interested in seeing this, the school-to-home communication and what they were using in order to get connected, and how often they were actually connecting. And again, you've got access to this, so you can go back and look at these if you're really interested. Two minor things about the impact on student outcomes. One of the things we heard about is that teachers were slowing down the pace, and there were a lot of schools that were saying, let's get serious about what these kids need for their future, and let's really focus in on the standards that really matter. So I thought that was really interesting. They're very, very deliberate about that direction. And we'll see, we don't really have much data about this, other than the fact that there were some parental concerns about it, and the student perceptions were interesting. 17% they were learning more, 50% same, and 33% said less. And then finally, the influence on changes in policy and practice. Just one quick comment on that. We have actually been looking at the LCAPs for several years now. And what we found is the COVID-19 report that is kind of the addendum to the LCAP about what they were doing in distance learning actually deepened and extended the way that the school districts were actually addressing technology. And so I thought that was really wonderful. And I'd like to just quickly look at just a couple recommendations. School2Home actually worked a lot on these, and I think they're really important because this is such a great model for everyone in California to look at. So their suggestions were to support this as a statewide model, to continue and actually to weave this into the LCAPs, if you will, to continue, and into your single planning, to continue the capacity building with you, but then build out new resources, because we know you're in different environments at this point in time, and School2Home is really listening to you to secure the network. You know that CETF and Sunny have just been advocates for years about this. Now is the time where people are looking at the urgency behind it, and so and you heard all about that before. Another one was to expand this network for the regional and the state networks to kind of grow broader beyond the 27 schools. And the last one is to continue with that implementation and the fidelity of the implementation and the broad perspective of effective integration in schools. So I'm going to stop there and turn this back to, if you have questions, email me. So thank you very much for your time. I think we're 2 minutes over. I'm going to turn this back to Augustine.
Yes,